Good evening, and thank you for joining us for this virtual lecture on the history of botanical art. I'm Amanda Skyer, Executive Director of the Preservation Foundation of Palm Beach, and we're so glad to have you here with us this evening. This lecture is the first in a series of lectures supporting our current exhibition, planned in partnership with the American Society of Botanical Artists. And wildly exquisite, Florida's Native Plants features 36 original contemporary works of art that are on display at the foundation from now until April 30th. These pieces were juried from a field of 200 international entries and are all for sale. We're delighted to have with us this evening Parisian-born botanical artist and instructor Catherine Waters to enlighten us on the fascinating history of botanical art. Catherine actually has two incredible works of art included in the exhibition as well. In addition to her private classes in San Francisco Bay Area, Catherine teaches at the UC Berkeley Botanical Garden, Wellesley College near Boston, and in France. She taught at Filoli in Woodside, California for 20 years, where she co-developed the Botanical Art Certificate Program. Catherine's paintings have been exhibited both nationally and internationally at such storied institutions as the Museum of Sydney, the Shirley Sherwood Gallery at Kew Gardens, Parc de Bagatelle in Paris, the Hunt Institute for Botanical Documentation at Carnegie Mellon University, and the Horticultural Society of New York. Her work is included in private collections and has been featured in several magazines throughout the US and in France. Catherine is the co-founder of the Alcatraz Florilegium in San Francisco and the Chateau de Bressy Florilegium in France. She serves on the board of directors of the American Society of Botanical Artists, the UC Berkeley Botanical Garden, and the Red List Project. At the end of her lectures this evening, Catherine will be happy to answer any questions, so we encourage you to please use the Q&A feature to submit your questions. Please join me in welcoming Catherine Waters. Thank you for being here, Catherine.
Thank you, Amanda, and thank you, Katie, for inviting me. And good afternoon, everyone. I'd also like to thank Carol Wooden, Director of Exhibitions at the American Society of Botanical Artists, for orchestrating this beautiful exhibition. So we will now start the history of botanical art. I will share my screen, and here we are. Great. Botanical art, let me just switch very quickly. Whoops. Just a moment, little technical difficulty there. Botanical art is a beautiful marriage of art and science. Since the beginning of time, man has drawn plants. Flower paintings were originally drawn for either decorative purposes or as a means of identifying plants used for medicine. The earliest example of botanical drawings were found in a tomb in Karnak, Egypt, which contained a large stone frieze with 275 plants carved on it, dating back to the 15th century BC. It was created following the return of the Egyptians from a victorious campaign in Syria and depicts the plants growing there at the time. The earliest examples of botanical art books, known as herbals, were designed to help the reader identify medicinal plants and understand their uses. Herbals explained how to gather the plants and the manner and dosage in which to apply them. The first herbal was illustrated by a Greek physician, herbalist, and painter named Crativus in 512 AD. It became a major reference book throughout the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. Throughout the first part of the millennium, when books were individually created, the tradition of copying illustrations became standard practice. At that time, the ability to decorate books was deemed much more important than accurately depicting the plants. Illustrations were copied from what is known as copybooks rather than from the plant itself. And consequently, plants were not accurately represented. At the end of the 15th century, a return to realism occurred, and it was called naturalism. Painters represented botanical subjects with much more detail and accuracy. An example of this was the Book of Hours, a personal prayer book made for the wealthy in which illustrations of flowers were featured. Early in the 16th century, the beginning of the Renaissance, Leonardo da Vinci, who was fascinated with nature's perfection, often depicted botanical subjects. In fact, da Vinci thought of himself more as a scientist than an artist. He was fascinated by the perfection of God as manifested in nature. German artist and printmaker Albrecht Dürer enjoyed painting plants in their environment. He was a teacher who often said to his students, "Study and be guided by nature. Do not depart from it thinking that you can do better yourself. You will be misguided, for truly art is hidden in nature, and he who can draw it possesses it." Born in Bavaria, Leonard Fuchs was a physician and professor who successfully treated many people struck by the plague in 1529. He wrote the herbal De Historia Stirpum about the history of plants. He was the first to show plants from the Americas. Linnaeus honored him by naming the American genus Fuchsia after him. Theodore de Brie was born in Belgium. He was an engraver, goldsmith, and editor who trained under his father and grandfather, who were jewelers and copperplate engravers. The art of copperplate engraving was the technology used for printing books at the time. Theodore de Brie traveled throughout Europe and settled in Frankfurt, where he created a large number of engraved illustrations for his books. John Gerard was an English botanist and herbalist who was one of the most respected plant experts of his time. For centuries, herbalism and medicine were essentially the same practice. John Gerard's book, known as Gerard's Herbal, was published in 1597. This book was based on a Dutch herbal, which was translated and updated. The 1,480-page volume contains many illustrations of plants from woodcuts and was the most widely circulated English language botany book of the 17th century. The explosion of botanical art in the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries was known as the Age of Exploration. There was a tremendous sense of discovery in these years and a demand by botanists and horticultural enthusiasts for accurate paintings of the exotic plants entering Europe from all over the world. At the end of the 16th century, the wealthy Bishop of Eichstätt in southern Germany set about rebuilding the great palace of Eichstätt. A big part of his plans was the gardens that surrounded the palace. He wanted to bring together every known species of plant in the world in order to recreate the Garden of Eden. His right-hand man, Basilius Bessler, was a physician from Nuremberg. He helped acquire the plants and build the garden, but most importantly, he oversaw the creation of a great picture book of all the plants in the garden, known as the Bessler Florilegium. For those of you not familiar with the term, a florilegium is a collection of botanical drawings and paintings depicting the plants growing in a specific area. The best artists were employed to draw the plants, and their work was transferred to copper plates by engravers. Each plate was printed, then hand-colored, and was accompanied by a text written by Bessler. The plants were arranged according to seasons, and the whole book with 367 illustrations was the biggest book ever printed when it came out in 1613. Crispin van de Pas was a Dutch publisher and engraver. His book, Hortus Floridus, was published in Latin. A year later, it was translated into English and titled A Garden of Flowers. This charming collection is full of spring flowers, such as tulips, hyacinths, fritillarias, and irises. The flowers are arranged according to seasons, and each is preceded by a verse. Frenchman Daniel Rabel was the son of an engraver and best known as a stage and costume designer for the court of Louis XIII in France. He was also a flower painter whose works were engraved and published with the very appropriate title of Theatrum Flore. This book contains 69 engravings. Whoops, just a moment. 69 engravings and was reprinted 3 times. He also produced watercolors on vellum for Gaston d'Orléans, brother of Louis XIII. They are featured in the collection Les Vélins du Muséum, the museum's vellums, at the Natural History in Paris. I'm sure you've all heard about tulipomania that struck Holland during the Golden Age between 1634 and 1637. There was a tremendous speculative market rush to acquire the latest and most exotic tulip bulbs. Contract prices reached extraordinarily high levels and then suddenly collapsed. At the peak of tulipomania in March 1637, some single tulip bulbs sold for more than 10 times the annual income of a skilled craftsman. It is generally considered the first recorded speculative bubble or economic bubble. The term tulip mania is used metaphorically to refer to any large economic bubble. Nicolas Robert, a French miniaturist and engraver, was a painter in the court of Louis XIV. He illustrated a small book of flowers named Fiori Diversi. His other main contribution to botanical art are found in the book La Guirlande de Julie for the lovely young Julie d'Angers, daughter of Parisian socialite Madame Rambouillet. The book is illustrated with paintings on vellum. His work is featured in the collection Les Vélins du Muséum at the Museum of Natural History in Paris. Among the adventurous artists who travel far from home to see exotic flora was Maria Sibylla Merian. She was born in Frankfurt into an artistic family. Her father, Matthias Merian, was a famous publisher who died when she was only 3 years old. Her mother then married a Dutch painter named Jacob Merel, who introduced Maria to the art of flower painting and natural history illustration. From an early age, she was fascinated by insects and especially by caterpillars. At 18, she married John Graff, a former student of her stepfather's. They moved to Nuremberg and had 2 daughters, Johanna Elena and Dorothea Maria. At this time, Merian started painting watercolors on vellum. Influenced by her stepfather's work, she illustrated and published a book in 3 volumes entitled The Book of Flowers. Maria Sibylla Merian soon returned to her favorite subject of caterpillars. In preparation, she collected, raised, and observed living insects rather than working from preserved specimens. Her book, Caterpillars, Their Wondrous Transformation and Peculiar Nourishment from Flowers, represented what has been called a major advance in entomology. The second volume depicted in detail the metamorphosis of moths and butterflies. Each image was organized around a single plant and was accompanied by a text in which she described the colors, forms, and timing of each stage of transformation. Her aesthetic sensitivity raised the standard of scientific illustration. Merian, who was an independent and adventurous woman, left her husband at the age of 38 and joined a strict Labadist religious commune in Holland with her mother and 2 daughters. After 5 years, she withdrew from the commune and moved to Amsterdam. At the age of 52, she set sail for Suriname, now Guyana, with her youngest daughter, Dorothea. The 4,860-mile journey took over 3 months. She lived there for 2 years recording the natural life of the Dutch colony and produced many illustrations of insects and their host plants. Sadly, she returned to Germany only after 2 years after contracting malaria. Upon her return, she started the monumental task of putting together her book, The Metamorphosis of the Insects of Suriname, which included 60 engravings. Maria Sibylla Merian was not just a talented artist, she was also a scientific pioneer. She died in Germany at the age of 69. Merian is a national hero in Germany and was honored on a recent stamp and a banknote. A research vessel was named after her as well. And in 2013, Merian was featured on a Google Doodle to celebrate her 366th birthday. Swedish botanist Carl Linnaeus is known as the father of natural history. He devised a new method of classifying plants by genus, species, and variety, the method we still use today. This was a revolutionary development that had enormous impact on the course of natural history by bringing together to the plant world, bringing orderliness to the plant world as well as the animal world. Linnaeus's work was influenced by Englishman Samuel Morland's discovery on how pollen traveled down the style of a flower and entered the seed. Linnaeus based his work upon the sexual function of plants. He was an organizational genius who identified 7,700 species of plants. It took many years for the Linnaean system of classification to become universally accepted. The thought that flowers could have two sexes, the pistil, female part, and the stamens, male parts, seemed to many to be perverse. Linnaeus was not deterred by criticism and traveled throughout Europe lecturing about his work. Eventually, his system was adopted by some of the most influential scientific men, including Mark Catesby, Benjamin Franklin, and John Bartram. By 1810, the sexual system of Linnaeus was the most widely used classification system. Give me 1 second. There we go. Jorg Arret was born in Heidelberg to a family of modest means. His father was a farmer and taught Arret how to draw. After his father died, Arret apprenticed for his uncle, who was a gardener, and continued to draw. His mother then married another gardener who hired Arret and his brother to work with him. Arret's big break came when he met Dr. Christoph True, a physician from Nuremberg. The wealthy True was a scientist, doctor, botanist, and collector who corresponded with botanists all over Europe. True became Arret's partner and friend and was a major influence in his career. He taught him botany and encouraged him to travel and meet other botanists. Arret spent the winter of 1734 in Paris, where he met botany professor Bernard de Jussieu, who arranged for him to stay at the Jardin du Roi, known today as the Jardin des Plantes, where the Museum of Natural History is located. There, Arret studied the collection of vellum paintings and met Madeleine Basporte, painter to the king. The next year, Arret went to England, where he painted the plants of the Chelsea Physic Garden. Not making much money yet, he decided to go to the Netherlands to meet wealthy banker George Clifford. At the same time, Linnaeus was also visiting Clifford. Arret produced paintings for Linnaeus for the book Hortus Cliffordianus, but turned down an offer to stay in Holland and went back to England, where he became the painter for the Chelsea Physic Garden and was appointed as draftsman at the University Botanic Gardens at Oxford. Arret's scientific paintings included details of flower and fruit structure and often had text referring to Linnaeus's new sexual system. These works were for publication and some were copied onto porcelain by the potteries of Chelsea and Tournai. Madeleine Basporte was a student of artist Claude Aubrier and succeeded him as King Louis XIV's flower painter. The daughter of a wine merchant, she supported her widowed mother by painting portraits, but soon realized that painting flowers was her calling. She became an important figure at the court of Louis XV, who enjoyed watching her paint and employed her to teach his children. She did several paintings for and gave interior decorating advice to Louis XV mistress, the Marquise de Pompadour. Passeporte was a warm-hearted person who gave free classes to poor girls. Her work is included in the collection of the Museum of Natural History in Paris. Sidney Parkinson had a brief but exciting life. When he was 24, he met Sir Joseph Banks and Captain Cook, who were planning a voyage around the world, and asked him to join them. They set sail on the ship Endeavour and visited Madeira, Rio de Janeiro, Tierra del Fuego, New Zealand, Australia, and Java. During the expedition, 30,000 plants were collected and dried. Parkinson produced 21 volumes of drawings before contracting dysentery and dying at sea on the voyage home. Parkinson's uncompleted work was finished by 3 artists. Between 1771 and 1784, Sir Joseph Banks hired 18 engravers to create the copper plate line engravings from the 743 completed watercolors at considerable cost. This collection became known as the Banks Florilegium. Unfortunately, for financial reasons, it was not printed during Banks' lifetime, and he bequeathed the plates to the British Museum, where they were nearly forgotten for almost 200 years. The first complete full-color edition of the Banks Florilegium was published between 1980 and 1990 in 34 parts by Electo Historical Editions and the British Museum. Only 100 sets were made available for sale. The plates were printed using a 17th century technique known as à la poupée, where each color was applied directly to the plate. Color accuracy was checked against Parkinson's notes, and each plate took from 1 to 2 weeks to proof. Dutch artist Gerard van Spandonk began his career in the decorative arts and joined his brother at the Sèvres porcelain factory in France. His talent was soon recognized, and he was named painter in miniature to King Louis XVI, a post which allowed him to meet many members of the court. He enjoyed a charmed life and taught many of the ladies in the court, and was known to be somewhat of a flirt. He was appointed professor of flower painting at the Jardin du Roi, taking over Madeleine Passeporte's position. He became responsible for the famous royal collection, Les Vélins du Roi, and contributed more than 50 works to this collection. He also taught many of the important 19th century artists, including Turpin, Poitou, Prévost, and Redouté. Van Spandonk immediately recognized Redouté's amazing talent and arranged for him to be appointed to the staff of the Museum of the Jardin du Roi, thereby launching the career of the most recognized botanical artist of all time. In 1804, Van Spandonk received the Legion of Honor and soon afterwards was ennobled by Napoleon Bonaparte. From a young age, Francis and Ferdinand Bauer were surrounded by art and illustration. Their father, Lucas Bauer, was court painter to the Prince of Liechtenstein, and following his early death was succeeded by his older son, Joseph. However, the real talent lay with Francis and his younger brother, Ferdinand. The Bauer brothers acquired their first taste of scientific botanical study with Father Norbert Boetius, producing over 2,000 watercolors of plants under his guidance. Further training was to follow in Vienna, as Franz and Ferdinand provided illustrations for the Schomburg Imperial Gardens in Vienna. The Bauer brothers' lives were to change following offers from 2 prominent English scientists. Francis accepted a lucrative offer from Sir Joseph Banks, who was the director of Kew Gardens. Francis received the title of Botanic Painter to His Majesty and settled at Kew Gardens working on detailed paintings and drawings, often at microscopic levels. He received the title of Botanic Painter. Oops, I said that again already. His legacy is found in the sumptuous publications such as delineations of exotic plants, illustrations of orchidaceous plants, for which he collaborated with John Linley, as well as the book Strelitzia Depicta. Ferdinand settled in Oxford after meeting Professor John Sibthorpe and devoted 13 years to illustrating what he collected from specimens from expeditions, which consisted of 1,000 colored drawings of plants, 363 of animals, and 131 of landscapes. He collaborated with Sibthorpe, who wrote descriptions for the 966 illustrations by Ferdinand for the book Flora Graeca. It cost the colossal sum of over 620 pounds to print the 25 copies. Although considered at the time to be a commercial failure, the timeless scientific value of Flora Graeca was undisputable. Returning to Vienna, Ferdinand settled near the Schomburg Imperial Gardens, and for the next year, he devoted his time to painting and excursions to the Australian Alps and the surrounding countryside. The most famous artist of the golden age of botanical art is Pierre-Joseph Redoute. Born in Belgium into a family of artists, Redoute was a prolific painter and illustrated countless books. He wanted to use his art for not only for scientific purposes, but also to bring aesthetic pleasure to the public. Redoute is well known for being the personal art teacher and botanical artist to Queen Marie Antoinette. She was an avid gardener, and he painted many flowers from her garden at the Petit Trianon on the property of the Palace of Versailles. It is said that one night, while imprisoned at the temple, Marie Antoinette summoned Redoute and asked him to paint a rare cactus which blooms only at night. Luckily, Redoute survived and continued to paint throughout the French Revolution, which lasted 10 years between 1789 and 1799 and saw the execution of 40,000 French citizens. After the revolution, Redoute became the teacher and artist of Empress Josephine, who was his most famous patron. He painted many rare plants at her Chateau de Malmaison, and this is the back of the chateau. Many of the plants came from Martinique, where she spent her childhood. And this is Josephine's bedroom, and you can see on the wall are several of Redoute's paintings. The best known work he did for Josephine was painting her collection of roses at Malmaison, published in his most famous book, The Roses. Redoute's highest public recognition was when King Charles X awarded him the Legion of Honor Medal in 1828. Redoute had an amazing life. He painted the plants of royalty from the most beautiful gardens. He collaborated with the greatest botanists of his day. He completed more than 2,100 paintings and of over 1,800 different species and illustrated approximately 50 books. This made him one of the most prolific and widely celebrated botanical artists of the 18th and 19th centuries. He died at 81 while painting a white lily. On a personal note, I was recently able to see Redoute's home located outside of Paris. He purchased it while working for Empress Josephine. The plaque at the lower right says, this cedar was offered in 1805 by Josephine de Beauharnais, Empress of France, to her art professor, the painter Redoute. And she has the same one in her garden. When you looked at the back of her chateau, there is the same one there. So how did I get to see this, the house? Well, it was really quite strange but wonderful. During a parent-teacher conference with my son's math teacher, Monsieur Coupe, he told me very matter-of-factly that his family home had once belonged to Redoute and that his bedroom was Redoute's studio, and that's the photo in the middle. Well, I can tell you that I almost fell off my chair. I couldn't believe what he was telling me. And he very kindly told me where it is located. So on my next visit to Paris, I went to see it. And it's privately owned, couldn't go inside, but I got to see it from the outside, and that was wonderful. This is Redouté's grave in the Père Lachaise cemetery in Paris. So the next day, after I saw his home, I went to Père Lachaise, which is a huge cemetery. I knew which section it was, and I knew there was a white marble pillar. So I went back and forth, and then I found it and spent some time there thinking about this magnificent artist. Pancras Bessat was a French natural history artist, best known for his botanical illustrations. Bessat was a student of Gérard van Donck and worked alongside Pierre-Joseph Redouté, some of whose influence shows in Bessat's detailed and delicate treatments of his subjects. He was a regular exhibitor at the Paris Salon. The Duchesse de Berry, daughter-in-law of King Charles X of France, extended her patronage to him, which led to his giving painting lessons to the de Berry family. Bessat also contributed a number of watercolors to Les Villains du Roi collection. In the early 19th century, Bessat, Redouté, Jean-Louis Prévost raised France to the preeminence in the genre of botanical painting. Bessat developed a masterful stipple engraving technique, an essential part of color printing. Bessat and Redouté collaborated on several books. Bessat's final work was Flore des Jardiniers. Pierre Jean-François Turpin was born in Normandy into a poor family, but became one of the foremost French botanists and botanical illustrators of his time. As an artist, Turpin was largely self-taught. He was stationed in Haiti as a member of the French army and met botanist Pierre-Antoine Poitou, who taught him botany, and together they created numerous botanical field drawings that were to become a basis of further study when the two men returned to France. While in Haiti, they were able to describe approximately 800 species of plants. Turpin would work with Poitou throughout his career. In 1833, he was elected as a member of the French Academy of Sciences, and the genus Turpinia is named in his honor. Dr. Robert Thornton was a wealthy Englishman and botanical writer. He was the visionary and driving force behind the creation of the Temple of Flora, one of the most famous florilegia. To produce it, he employed a team of the finest British artists and engravers of his day. Between 1798 and 1807, the artist painted 33 flower portraits set against evocative backgrounds. Then the engravers produced colored plates, and Thornton wrote a flowery text to accompany each painting. When he planned the project, Thornton wanted to publish 70 folio-size plates. Lack of interest from the general public spelled disaster for the project. Desperate to continue funding his work, Thornton now embarked on his wildest scheme. He applied for and was granted permission by Parliament to hold a fantastic lottery. For prizes, he included a quarto or miniature edition of the Temple of Flora. The lottery failed to attract ample participants and could not save him from financial ruin. Later in life, Thornton wrote that the idea for his great undertaking was meant to be a patriotic work celebrating the artistic superiority of the British over the French, while glorifying the philosophy of botany. Thornton died destitute, financially ruined by his dreams. Unfortunately, he never knew that his great work went on to become a lasting heirloom of the British nation. Curtis's Botanical Magazine, started by William Curtis in London in 1787, is the longest running botanical magazine in the world. It has been continuously published for over 200 years. William Curtis was a trained pharmacist living in London whose passion was the study of flora and insects. He maintained a large private botanical garden where he grew beautiful exotic plants. Curtis started the magazine as a small, inexpensive, and popular illustrated journal of new and rare plants. Often referred to as the Bot Mag, the magazine has had a succession of well-known editors, including William Curtis, William Hooker, and his son, Sir Joseph Hooker. The current editor is Martin Ricks, an accomplished author who has produced 23 books and numerous scientific papers. After World War I, the magazine almost ceased publication due to financial problems. It was saved in 1921 by three generous donors, Henry Elves of Colesburn, Lionel de Rothschild of Exbury, and William Corey, a wealthy coal merchant who was one of the most generous benefactors to horticulture in the early 20th century. The subscription magazine published by Wiley Blackwell Publishing is designed for those interested in new plants of horticultural merit, as well as those who have an affinity for botanical illustration. The articles are written by botanists who describe the history, habitat, and botanical information of common ornamental plants, as well as new, rare, and endangered species. Each article is accompanied by a botanical illustration. Well-known former chief artists include Sydenham Edwards, James Sowerby, Sir Walter Hood Fitch, Lillian Stelling, and Margaret Stones. Today, the principal artist is Christabel King. The illustrations were originally hand-colored copperplate engravings, which are now collector's items. Around 1830, the new printing process of lithography replaced engraving, but the plates were still hand-colored. In 1949, when color printing was used instead, and was of course much less expensive, most of the original illustrations are in the permanent collection of the library at the Royal Botanic Gardens, Kew. British-born Mrs. Augusta Withers never published a work under her own name, but her contribution to 19th century botanical illustration was very important. She was a prolific artist and teacher who produced hundreds of plates for botanical journals and became the flower painter to Queen Adelaide. Between 1836 and 1843, James Bateman published the much celebrated Orchidaceae of Mexico and Guatemala. Many of the plates were completed by Augusta Withers, but she received little recognition for her work. After the death of her husband and patron, Queen Adelaide, she was left destitute and applied for the post of botanical flower painter at Kew Gardens, but was rejected because the position was not open to women. Sadly, she died in poverty. Like Augusta Withers, Miss Drake was also born in England and contributed illustrations to James Bateman's book on orchids and received little recognition for her work. She was a skilled illustrator and became an accomplished botanical artist under the tutelage of John Lindley, a professor of botany at the University of London. Ducky, as she was affectionately known, lived in the Lindley family home. Jane Webb Loudon married Claudius Loudon, a well-known botanical writer, and together they produced a number of books and magazines. She received acclaim as a writer of popular garden books aimed at female audience. Her formula was simple, combining charming illustrations with a brief text in layman terms to appeal to a greater audience. After her death, the death of her husband, she was left almost penniless. An award from the Royal Literary Fund for £29 helped her alleviate her hardship, and she continued to publish books to support herself and her daughter. Her book, British Wildflowers, full of beautiful illustrations, met with great acclaim. Englishman John Lindley, professor and director of the Chelsea Physic Garden, was also a talented artist who illustrated his publications. He felt it was important for a botanist to also be an illustrator, focusing on plant morphology. John Lindley assisted his nurseryman father in the garden as a boy, and also collected the wildflowers he found growing along the Norfolk countryside. He became a seed merchant and soon met botanist William Hooker, who allowed him to use his botanical library and introduced him to Sir Joseph Banks, who offered him employment as an assistant in his herbarium. Lindley went to work at Banks' home in London. He concentrated on the genera Rosa and digitalis and published a botanical history of roses, which distinguished 76 species and described 13 new ones. At the age of 21, Lindley was elected a fellow of the Linnean Society of London. Soon after, Lindley was appointed assistant chief to the Horticultural Society at its new garden at Chiswick. A couple of years later, he became chairman of the botany department at the University College of London. He became a fellow of the Royal Linnean and Geological Societies and received a medal from the Royal Horticultural Society. In the first part of the 20th century, botanical art increasingly faded from public view and was frequently not even considered to be an art form and looked upon as mere copying. This in part was due to the fascination and creative capabilities of photography and the belief that a camera could capture more quickly and efficiently the true structure of a plant. But there remained a need for scientifically accurate botanical illustrations at Kew Gardens, where Curtis's Botanical Magazine is still published. Botanical art is currently in full revival, in great part due to the founding of the American Society of Botanical Artists in 1995 by Diane Bouchier. There are currently over 1,800 international members in the ASBA. Dr. Shirley Sherwood has played a major role in the revival and interest in botanical art. She is a collector and author of numerous books on the subject. The Shirley Sherwood Gallery of Botanical Art at Kew Gardens opened in 2008 and is the first gallery in the world dedicated solely to botanical art. And this is an absolutely gorgeous painting of a fritillaria by one of my very, very favorite contemporary artist, Rory McEwen. These two lovely orchids, seemingly curtsying to each other, were printed 140 years apart by Carol Wooden and James Bateman. If only we could travel in time, it would be fascinating to listen to a conversation between these two artists. Carol's painting shows how beautifully the tradition continues. A number of contemporary florilegia have been created in much the same way as the historic ones, bringing together international artists to immortalize the plants growing in botanical gardens, royal gardens, and even prison gardens. The Brooklyn Botanic Garden Florilegium was established in 2000 by Pat Jonas and Francesca Anderson to document the garden's living collections. The Florilegium of over 200 paintings is currently managed by Kathy Crosby. The lowly Florilegium was started in 2002 by Marley Barker, former head of education, and is currently managed by Julie DeVere, Filoli's director of museum collections. The Florilegium documents the plants growing in the beautiful gardens at Filoli, located in Woodside, south of San Francisco. The Highgrove Florilegium was overseen by Anne-Marie Evans, who developed the diploma course in botanical painting at the Chelsea Physic Garden. The plants and trees growing in the gardens of Highgrove, the family residence of the Prince of Wales and the Duchess of Cornwall, were painted for 7 years by leading botanical artists from around the world. Each painting was submitted to the selection panel led by Anne-Marie Evans to ensure that the paintings met the highest standards. The collection of 124 paintings are published in 2 hand-bound volumes. The National Tropical Botanical Garden Florilegium was founded in 2015 by artist and instructor Wendy Hollander. Each year, a group of international artists meet at NTBG on the island of Kauai for a couple of weeks to paint the treasures growing on the vast property. The National Tropical Botanical Garden is dedicated to preserving tropical plant diversity and stemming the tide of extinction. The Sydney Royal Botanical Garden Florilegium was overseen by artist Beverly Allen to celebrate 200 years of the garden. This collection of 88 paintings by 64 international artists documents the living collection of the Sydney Royal Botanic Gardens and Domain Trust. The Alcatraz Florilegium is a collection of drawings and paintings of the survivor plants growing in the restored gardens on Alcatraz Island in the San Francisco Bay. The survivor plants managed to cling to life despite more than 40 years of neglect after the island was abandoned in 1963 following the closure of the well-known federal penitentiary. Restoration of the gardens began in 2003 and lasted for 10 years. The project took over 4 years to complete and was overseen by artists Lynn Dahl, Sally Petru, and me. There are 127 works in the collection by 77 artists who are members of the Northern California Society of Botanical Artists. The Chateau de Brécy Florilegium was the idea of Beatrice Salberg, who kindly asked me to join her in developing the project. It is the first contemporary florilegium in France. This project illustrates the plants growing in the magnificent gardens of Chateau de Brécy in Normandy, owned by Didier and Barbara Worth, close friends of Beatrice. The project started on D-Day in 2011, united European and American artists. Every year, for 7 years, the artists gathered for a magical week of painting. The book with 40 illustrations by 30 artists is dedicated to Barbara Worth, who sadly passed away before the project was completed. The Transylvania Florilegium is a celebration of the wildflowers growing around the Prince of Wales properties near the Saxon villages, as well as a valuable record of the rare flora of Transylvania region in central Romania. The project was headed up by Helen Allen in collaboration with Dr. John Ackroyd, an authority on European plants who has been working on Transylvania flora for many years. The collection of 124 paintings by 36 international artists took 7 years to complete and was published in a two-volume edition. The Botanic Endeavor is the latest project of the Sydney Royal Botanic Garden Florilegium Society and overseen by Beverly Allen. It was created to celebrate the Banks and Solander collection of 132 species collected by Joseph Banks, Daniel Solander, and Sidney Parkinson in 1770 during their stay in Botany Bay while the ship Endeavour was being repaired. The 45 illustrations by 39 artists are masterfully combined in the book with the photograph of the herbarium specimens collected 250 years ago. To create a botanical painting, you must have time, patience, and curiosity, which will lead to a keen sense of observation. You will discover the most amazing details of a plant when you look at it closely. This quote by Pablo Picasso says it perfectly. It takes as much time to learn how to see as it does to learn how to paint. Botanical Art Techniques is a beautifully illustrated, one-of-a-kind practical guide to a variety of techniques used in botanical art and illustrations. It features ASBA artists and instructors and was edited by Carol Wooden, ASBA Exhibitions Director, and Robin Jess, former ASBA Director. Published by Timber Press, the book was received with great acclaim and is already in its second printing. Contemporary botanical artists are fortunate to have a colorful history to draw inspiration from, the best art materials, and a variety of plants to work with in order to create their own legacy. So now I will come back to you and answer any questions. So here I am, and I have to have a little drink of water. There. You're muted, I think.
Thank
Amanda.
you. And that
Yeah.
was such a wonderfully informative lecture, and the images were really stunning, and it was so great to hear all of the wonderful stories about all of the artists behind them. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Very welcome.
Do we have anyone in the audience that would like to ask a question of Catherine?
Happy to answer them.
I don't know if we have any at the moment. I do see a note that someone wanted us to record, which we will make this recording available to all of our members and anyone in attendance this evening in the next few days. I think one has just come in, and it is from, let's see, there's a chat feature is being used. Sarah Berthaud said, "Thank you for a great session." And then something in French, which I'm clearly terrible at pronouncing.
Oh, well, I can't see it. I can't see it, but thank you. Thank you very much.
And Denise Cedar said, "Thank you so much. What a rich tradition we have. And I'm so glad that now our field is full of incredible women."
It is great. And I see 5 in the Q&A. I see 5
Oh,
questions.
perfect. Okay, so
coming in later.
okay, Jody Williams asks, "You mentioned the Natural History Museum in Paris several times. Can you visit there and see some of this artwork?"
Yes. Well, hi, Jody. It is extremely difficult to get in there and see the artwork unless they're having an exhibition. And I'll tell you why. I tried twice to write to the director. It's held in the library. And I wrote twice to the director, said I was a French citizen, I was a botanical artist, an instructor, and I never heard back from her. And then one summer, maybe 15 or so years ago, one of my students had just visited Paris and said, "Oh, you'll never guess what I saw." And I said, "Well, what?" And she said, "I saw the collection of vellums at the Natural History Museum." And I said, "How did you do that?" And she said, "My husband works with the brother of the director, of course." And then she asked, could you please write a thank you note for me?" And I said, "Okay, but can we add a little PS?" My instructor would really like to see the collection. That's how I got in. So Jody, if that lady is still there, they guard that collection so tightly, but can certainly try. But they often have exhibits, and you can have, well, not often, but often enough, and you can see some of the work there. But it's all digitized, I believe, and you can go on the website.
Wonderful. So you have to have the right connections.
Well, obviously I didn't. So, yeah.
Carol Wooden asks, "Do you have any idea why so many artists today are women as opposed to in the past when it was predominantly male dominated?"
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think in the past, there were possibly more women, but they didn't get the recognition that women do today. And today, I really believe that given the dynamics of our society, the age group in our society, a lot of the women either don't work or are retired or just absolutely love it. So juggle work with painting. But it definitely is a women's world right now. We have some wonderful men in our society and very talented men, but it is definitely women dominated, just like our government right now.
Stuart Pavlik asks, "There appears to be a time when insects were featured in many of these works of art, but not as much now. Can you please reflect upon that?"
Well, the person who really put that on the forefront was Maria Sibylla Merian, because really she was more interested in the insects at first, but wanted to show their host plant. Today, you still see occasional insects, but to be a true botanical artist, the focal point has to be flowers. It has to be a majority of your, a great percentage of your painting has to be the plant, but you will see them. And I think really Maria Sibylla Merian, put the insects in because that was her focal point. But it's fine. You can still put insects or even birds.
Wonderful. Well, I have a question here about the exhibition that we have here at the foundation. And you did not serve on the jury for this exhibition, but can you tell us a little bit about what goes into the jurying of these international exhibitions?
Yes, I have been honored as a juror, and I can tell you that the jurors receive the artwork with nobody's name on it because it has to be anonymous. So on their own, before they meet as a jury, they review everything, make little notes, be well prepared, and then there's a day of jurying, which takes most of the day, as Carol can attest. And it's grueling, but it's absolutely wonderful. At the end of the day, you can't even see straight, but it is so wonderful because you have a little, sheets that you can mark. There's a number, 1 to 5, that you can mark, and then Carol, who is the moderator, she, after when we take a break, she'll weed it down to a smaller number. And then the discussions begin, and they can be quite lengthy. And because these exhibits don't have many, you can see, I think yours has, was it 30 something?
36.
36. Typically, it's between 36 and maybe 42, 44. A relatively small number, and that's because Carol and the ASBA wants to keep these exhibitions at a very high level. So you said, did you say there were 200 entries in this one?
Yes, there were.
Yeah. So you can see that it had to be brought down to 36, and sometimes there are many more. And it is a grueling job, but very exciting to be part of a jury. So that's how it happens.
And
And
I mentioned,
go ahead.
sorry, go ahead.
No, I say at the end, we do find out who's who. And there are certain artists whose work is immediately recognizable because they have a style that's so unique still that falls under the umbrella of botanical art. So go ahead with your question.
And I mentioned during the introduction how you have 2 works of art in the exhibition. And the second part of that question is, how do the artists go about selecting the plant material for their paintings?
Well, it depends on the call for entries for the exhibition. This one was very specific to Florida, and we were provided with a big list of plants, and artists choose from that list. When it's an open call for, we have an annual international exhibition, there artists can submit any plant they wish for that call for entry. So when it's specific, which I really like because it really narrows down, although there are usually hundreds of names of plants on those lists, but a theme is always lovely with an exhibition.
And so ours ties in perfectly with Pan's Garden, and we were saying how wonderful it would have been if you could have been here in person this evening.
Oh yes, when you gave me that little
Having you here for a
oh,
tour of the garden, which features all native plants. How did you choose the 2 plants that you featured in the artworks that you submitted?
well, I love gentian, and I had noticed them in France first, and thought the blue of these flowers. They're not always blue, but there are some that have such an exquisite blue, is what attracted me. And then I saw some on the East Coast, and that worked for this exhibition. And then the persimmons, I just think in the fall, a persimmon tree with no leaves is absolutely, I have 1 leaf or maybe 2 in that, but the persimmons were really the focal point. And when in the fall, they're just like glowing ornaments. And that's what really drew me to painting
I
that.
love that description, and I was just thinking that's enticing everyone to come and visit the exhibition after this lecture. Another question is, how did you get interested in this field? Were you a gardener first or an artist?
Well, very interesting. Ever since I was little, a child, I always drew flowers, and I remember clearly in junior and high school, in the margin of all my papers, I would draw flowers, and I used to sign my name, Catherine. On the I, it was always a flower. When I was young, I stopped that. I think when in my mid 20s, because it was a little bit silly, but I minored in art in college, but that was at a time when art was, and the best way to describe it, was pretty far out. And there was nothing, no botanical illustration. And one of my father's friends, um, you know what, completely blanking out, just a moment. Mary Foley Benson. She lived in Davis, where my parents lived, and she was a botanical artist and had exhibited. She worked for the university, and she had exhibited at the Hunt Institute for Botanical Documentation. And I was able to meet with her and was very just overwhelmed by what she did. I am largely self-taught, although I did take one class. I've taken a few classes through ASBA because there's so many magnificent artists and instructors, but I took one class in the mid 80s when I knew nobody was doing this. And it was by a teacher who was doing a 6-week class. The minute I walked in, I said, this is what I want to be and what I want to do for the rest of my life. And then she moved to LA, and then I was all by myself. So that's why I say I'm largely self-taught, because I just continued on researching and working on my own work.
Wonderful. It's always great to hear the life experiences that contributed to
Yeah.
who you are today. David Kagan commented that the Redoute drawings went to auction at Sotheby's about 30 years ago. Do you know if they were kept together or sold separately? And is there anywhere people can go to see them today?
Yes. I will tell you, they are not all together. They are scattered throughout the world. And I actually have a little one at my house. It is my most, I told my children when I die, do not sell that at in a garage sale. I want you to know it's insured, and you either keep it in the family or you sell it properly. But they are all over the world, and there is a gallery in New York. They're called the Arader Gallery, Arader, that has a big collection of them. And they have sold many of them, and they've been in the process in the last few years of having auctions. So you will find them at auction through the Arader Gallery. I also know that they're in museums all over the world. They are at the in San Francisco, and all of a sudden I'm blanking out. Very famous museum in San Francisco. Totally blanking out on the name of the museum, but there are several there because they were given by a lady who lives in the town where I live, Orinda, who had a huge collection. She gave that her collection there. So they're scattered throughout the world, and yes, they can be seen. And about 3 years ago, there was the best collection, the best exhibit I've ever seen. It was in Paris at a very small museum called the Museum of Romantic Life, le Muséum de la Vie Romantique, where they gathered pieces from all over the world. It was absolutely exquisite. So you can see them definitely, and good luck to the person who asked. If you're looking to buy one, they are usually fairly expensive.
Well, luckily there are some places where we can go and see them and enjoy them.
Yes, exactly.
I now have a question about the artist Bessler and whether he included his own paintings in his compilation of 367 illustrations.
He wasn't a painter. He did the.
Oh, interesting.
No, it's very interesting because the Bishop of Eichstätt hired Basilius Bessler to gather a team of artists. So he put together the collection and wrote the text, but he was not an artist.
It's more of an editor.
More of an editor, yes.
Wonderful. And then our last question is, how does one create a florilegium?
Well, that is a good question. What you have to have first is the location that you wish to represent. And that, as I said, it could be your own garden, for that matter. It could be your own garden. It could be a public garden in your city, a botanical garden, prison garden, such as Alcatraz. What you have to do is if you're doing your own garden, you can do it yourself or hire 1 or 2 artists to do it for you. But you have to give a list of plants. And what's very important on these in the big florilegia is to have jurs. because you want utmost quality in a florilegium. So you bring together the artist, or you send plant material to the artist if they can't go there, which becomes quite difficult because you really want the artist to work from live plants. So you have to have a location, you have to have a group of artists, jurors, and then the ultimate result is hopefully a book. And then you need to find a way to publish the book and write the text. So it's definitely doable. And if anybody wants to talk to me directly about it, I've done it a couple of times.
Wonderful. We have one last question that just came in, and who are the contemporary botanical artists who inspire you today?
Oh my goodness. Well, I have behind me several little small works by people that I absolutely love. Well, I must say that Rory McEwen, I showed the fritillaria. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us. But I have a paint, actually, it's a print of his above my desk, which I absolutely love. And right here, I have a painting by Lizzie Sanders, Rose Hips over there, that I absolutely love. Sadly, she passed away last summer also. Carol Wooden's right over here. And, you know, it's so nice. Martha Kemp is at the top. And Asuka Hishiki is right here, darling Japanese woman. But there are countless, oh my goodness, there are so many. Kate Nestler. Kate Nestler, I have a couple pieces by Kate. And she's someone whose work I think is incredible. But, you know, there are so many, and trying to think of others. And I'm sorry if I'm not mentioning your name, because I think so highly of so many of you, and you inspire me in my work.
Well, I think it's so wonderful your involvement with the ASBA and what a great job the organization does giving all of these artists a platform to share their work. And this has just been so wonderful to have you with us this evening. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much.